The morning of July 15th, 2010 started like every parent's dream. Sarah Mitchell had been planning this Disney World vacation for months, saving every penny to give her 6-year-old son Tommy the magical experience she never had as a child. The Florida sun was already blazing at 8 a.m. as they walked through the gates of the Magic Kingdom, Tommy's eyes wide with wonder at the towering Cinderella castle ahead. "Mom, can we see Mickey first?" Tommy asked, tugging at her hand with the infectious excitement only a child could possess. His blonde hair caught the morning light, and his gap-toothed smile made Sarah's heart swell with pure maternal joy. She had no idea this would be the last normal conversation they would ever have. Sarah was a single mother from a small town in Ohio. At 28, she worked double shifts at the local diner to make ends meet, but seeing Tommy's face light up at every Disney character made every sacrifice worth it. She had planned this trip down to the minute: fast passes for the most popular rides, character dining reservations, and a carefully mapped route through the park to maximize their magical experience. The first few hours were everything she had dreamed of. Tommy met Goofy near the entrance, his nervous giggles turning into full belly laughs as the character ruffled his hair. They rode the Pirates of the Caribbean twice because Tommy insisted the pirates were the coolest thing ever. At lunch, he devoured Mickey-shaped chicken nuggets while recounting every detail of their morning adventures. "This is the best day of my whole life, Mom," Tommy declared, ketchup smeared across his cheek. Sarah wiped it away gently, memorizing every detail of his face, though she didn't know why. Something deep in her mother's intuition was already whispering warnings she couldn't yet understand. By 2 p.m., the Florida heat was becoming oppressive. The park was packed with families, strollers, and the constant hum of excited children. Sarah suggested they head to Fantasyland for some indoor attractions, and Tommy eagerly agreed, especially when she mentioned they might catch a glimpse of his favorite character, Chip from Chip and Dale. As they walked through the crowded pathways, Sarah noticed how easily children could disappear in the sea of people. She tightened her grip on Tommy's hand, but he was distracted by everything around him: the street performers, the elaborate decorations, the other children running past with balloons and cotton candy. "Stay close to Mommy," she reminded him, for the 100th time that day. Tommy nodded absently, his attention already captured by a group of teenagers wearing matching t-shirts and mouse ears. They were approaching the Mad Tea Party when Tommy suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. "Mom, look," he shouted, pointing toward a cluster of trees near the attraction. "It's Chip. He's right there." Sarah followed his gaze and saw a figure in a chipmunk costume waving at children from a shaded area slightly off the main path. It wasn't unusual. Disney characters often appeared in unexpected locations to create magical moments. But something about this particular interaction felt different. The character seemed to be specifically gesturing toward Tommy, and her son was absolutely mesmerized. "Can I go say hi?" Tommy pleaded, already pulling toward the character before Sarah could respond. The area wasn't far, maybe 30 feet, from where they stood, and there were other families nearby. It seemed safe enough. "Okay, but stay where I can see you," Sarah called out as Tommy broke free from her grasp and ran toward his beloved character. She watched him approach the costumed figure, saw the character kneel down to Tommy's level, and noticed how animated their interaction became. Sarah pulled out her phone to capture the moment. Through the small screen, she watched Tommy talking excitedly to the character, his hands gesturing wildly as he no doubt recounted their entire day's adventures. The character seemed to be listening intently, occasionally nodding or patting Tommy's shoulder in an encouraging way. Other parents were taking photos too, and Sarah felt that familiar warmth of shared parental joy. These were the moments that made all the planning and expense worthwhile, seeing your child experience pure, unbridled happiness. She was adjusting her phone's camera settings when a group of teenagers walked between her and Tommy, temporarily blocking her view. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but when they passed, Sarah's blood turned to ice. Tommy was gone. The character was gone. The shaded area that had been filled with magical interaction just moments before was now empty except for a few scattered families who seemed completely unaware that anything was amiss. "Tommy!" Sarah called out, her voice still calm but with an edge of concern. She walked quickly toward the spot where she had last seen him, scanning the immediate area. Tommy, where are you? The other families looked at her with mild curiosity, but no one seemed to have noticed where the little boy or the character had gone. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized that in a place designed to be magical, something very dark was unfolding. Excuse me. She approached a mother with 2 young children. Did you see where the little blonde boy went? He was just talking. To Chip? The woman looked confused. I'm sorry, I didn't notice. There are so many children here. Sarah's panic was building, but she forced herself to think logically. Tommy was probably just exploring nearby, maybe following the character. To another location, children got distracted easily, especially in a place like Disney World. She began walking in widening circles, calling his name with increasing urgency. Tommy, Tommy, where are you? Other parents began to notice her distress, and soon, several families were helping her search the immediate area. They checked behind trees near other attractions, and even asked cast members if they had seen a 6-year-old boy in a red Mickey Mouse t-shirt and blue shorts. 20 minutes passed. Then, 30. Sarah's calm facade crumbled completely as the reality of the situation hit her like a physical blow. Her son, her baby, had vanished in the most surveilled, security-conscious place on Earth. A Disney security officer approached her, his expression serious but professional. Ma'am, I understand you can't locate your son. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Through tears and barely controlled hysteria, Sarah recounted the events. The security officer took detailed notes, radioed for additional support, and assured her that Disney had protocols for these situations. The park would be locked down, security footage would be reviewed, and every cast member would be alerted. But as Sarah stood in that shaded area where she had last seen Tommy, staring at the empty space where her son's laughter had filled the air just an hour before, she knew with a mother's terrible intuition that this was not going to be a simple case of a lost child wandering off to explore. Something had taken her baby, and as the Florida sun began its descent toward evening, casting long shadows across the Magic Kingdom, Sarah Mitchell's perfect family day transformed into the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 14 years of her life. The search was just beginning, but already in the back of her mind, Sarah was preparing for a battle that would test every ounce of strength, determination, and hope she possessed. The Disney security team moved with practiced efficiency, but Sarah could see the concern growing in their eyes as the minutes ticked by. Officer Martinez, a veteran of the park's security force, had seen lost children before, hundreds of them. But something about this case felt different from the start. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to think very carefully, Martinez said, his voice gentle but urgent. You mentioned the character was wearing a Chip costume. Did you notice anything unusual about it, any details that seemed off? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to replay those precious final moments with Tommy. It looked normal to me. Brown fur, the little black nose, the striped tail, but I wasn't really studying it closely. I was just happy to see Tommy so excited. The security team had already begun reviewing footage from the numerous cameras positioned throughout the park. Disney World was one of the most surveilled places on Earth, with cameras capturing virtually every angle of every pathway. If Tommy had been taken, there would be evidence. But as the hours passed, a disturbing pattern emerged. The cameras had captured Tommy approaching the character, but the angle and positioning of nearby trees created a blind spot exactly where the interaction had taken place. It was as if someone had known precisely where the surveillance gaps existed. This is highly unusual, Martinez confided to his supervisor over the radio. Either we're dealing with incredible bad luck, or someone who knows our security layout intimately. By 6 p.m., the Orange County Sheriff's Office had been called in. Detective Lisa Rodriguez arrived with a team of specialists trained in child abduction cases. She was a mother herself, and Sarah could see the personal investment in her eyes as she took over the investigation. Sarah, I need you to know that we're treating this as an abduction from minute one, Detective Rodriguez said firmly. We're not waiting the traditional 24 hours. Every second counts in cases like this. The detective's words hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. Abduction. The word she had been trying not to think was now spoken aloud by a professional who dealt with these nightmares for a living. "But how is that possible?" Sarah whispered. "We're at Disney World. There are thousands of people around. Security everywhere. How could someone just take a child?" Rodriguez had seen this disbelief before. Parents always struggled to accept that evil could penetrate even the most magical places on Earth. Unfortunately, predators often target places where parents feel safe and let their guard down. The crowds that make you feel secure can also provide cover for someone with bad intentions. As the investigation expanded, more disturbing details emerged. The character costume that Tommy had approached wasn't scheduled to be in that location. According to Disney's character deployment records, Chip was supposed to be at a meet and greet session in Toontown at that exact time, nearly half a mile away. Someone was wearing an unauthorized costume, Martinez reported to the growing team of investigators. This wasn't a Disney employee. The implications were chilling. Someone had obtained a professional quality Disney character costume, studied the park's layout well enough to find surveillance blind spots, and specifically targeted that location at that time. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was carefully planned. As darkness fell over the Magic Kingdom, the search took on a more desperate tone. K-9 units arrived to track Tommy's scent, but the thousands of visitors who had passed through the area made it nearly impossible to isolate his trail. The dogs led searchers in circles, overwhelmed by the competing scents of countless children who had been in the same location throughout the day. Sarah refused to leave the park. Even as other families departed with their tired, happy children, she remained in that shaded area where she had last seen Tommy, as if her presence there might somehow bring him back. "Mrs. Mitchell, you should consider going back to your hotel," Detective Rodriguez suggested gently. "We'll continue searching through the night and you need to rest." "I can't leave," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from calling Tommy's name. "For hours. What if he comes back looking for me? What if he's scared and trying to find this spot?" It was nearly midnight when the first real clue emerged. A Disney maintenance worker, emptying trash cans in the area, made a discovery that sent chills through the entire investigation team. Stuffed deep in a garbage bin approximately 50 yards from where Tommy had disappeared was a Chip costume. Not just any costume, a professional-grade outfit identical to those used by official Disney character performers. "Nobody touch anything," Detective Rodriguez commanded as the maintenance worker stepped back from the bin. "This is now a crime scene." The costume was carefully extracted and bagged as evidence. Even in the dim light of the maintenance area, investigators could see that it appeared to have been hastily discarded. The headpiece was separated from the body, and there were what appeared to be grass stains on the knees, suggesting someone had been kneeling or crawling. "Why would someone throw away the costume?" Sarah asked, watching the evidence collection with a mixture of hope and dread. "Does this mean—" "It could mean several things," Rodriguez replied carefully. "It might mean the perpetrator needed to change appearance quickly to blend in with other park visitors, or it could mean they had another method of transportation waiting outside the park." The discovery of the costume confirmed everyone's worst fears while simultaneously providing the first concrete evidence that a crime had been committed. This wasn't a case of a lost child or a family misunderstanding. Tommy Mitchell had been deliberately taken by someone who had planned the abduction carefully. As crime scene technicians processed the costume for DNA evidence, fingerprints, and any other clues it might yield, Sarah found herself staring at the discarded outfit that had been used to lure her son away from safety. The brown fur that had seemed so magical just hours earlier now looked sinister under the harsh lights of the investigation. The cheerful cartoon features that had delighted Tommy were now evidence in what was becoming one of the most disturbing cases in Disney World's history. "We're going to find him," Detective Rodriguez promised, though Sarah could hear the uncertainty beneath her professional confidence. "Whoever did this made mistakes. They left evidence. We will find your son." But as the first night of Tommy's disappearance stretched toward dawn, Sarah was beginning to understand that finding him might be only the beginning of a much longer, more painful journey than she had ever imagined possible. The Magic Kingdom had become the scene of her worst nightmare, and the costume that had brought such joy to her son was now the first piece of evidence in a puzzle that would take 14 years to solve. Dawn broke over Disney World on July 16, 2010, but there was no magic in the sunrise for Sarah Mitchell. She had spent the night in a conference room at the park's security headquarters, surrounded by investigators, FBI agents who had been called in due to the suspected child abduction, and Disney executives who were clearly struggling to manage both the investigation and the potential public relations nightmare. Agent Michael Chen from the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team had arrived at 3 a.m. He was a specialist in cases involving missing children, and his presence both comforted and terrified Sarah. The FBI only got involved when local authorities believed a child had been taken across state lines, or when they suspected the worst possible outcomes. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to ask you some detailed questions about Tommy's routine, your family situation, and anyone who might have had access to information about your Disney trip, Agent Chen said, his voice professional but kind. The questions that followed were invasive and painful. Did Tommy have any behavioral issues that might make him more susceptible to strangers? Had Sarah noticed anyone following them or showing unusual interest in Tommy? Were there any custody, disputes, angry ex-boyfriends, or family members who might have motivation to take Tommy? There's no one, Sarah insisted, tears streaming down her face. Tommy's father left when he was 2. We don't have contact with him, and he's never shown any interest in being a parent. My family is supportive. There's literally no one who would do this. But Agent Chen had learned that in child abduction cases, the most dangerous perpetrators were often those who seemed least likely to commit such crimes. The investigation would need to examine every possibility, no matter how remote or painful. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the discarded chip costume was yielding disturbing results. The outfit was indeed professional quality, but it wasn't stolen Disney property. Instead, it appeared to be a custom-made replica, suggesting someone had invested significant time and money in planning this abduction. The stitching patterns and materials indicate this was made by someone with professional costume-making skills, the forensic specialist reported. This isn't something you could buy online or throw together quickly. Someone spent weeks, maybe months, creating this. Even more chilling was the discovery of a small hidden pocket sewn into the costume's interior. Inside, investigators found a child-sized sedative, the kind used in hospitals to calm anxious young patients before procedures. This confirms our worst fears, Detective Rodriguez told the assembled team. This wasn't a spontaneous crime. Someone planned this abduction meticulously, including having the means to subdue a child if necessary. The sedative discovery prompted an immediate expansion of the investigation. Hospitals, veterinary clinics, and medical supply companies throughout Florida were contacted to identify anyone who had recently purchased or had access to the specific medication found in the costume. As the investigation widened, Disney World implemented unprecedented security measures. Every employee who had worked in the park on July 15th was interviewed. Background checks were run on anyone who had access to character costumes or knowledge of the park's surveillance blind spots. The company's cooperation was complete, but the scope of the investigation was staggering. We're talking about thousands of employees, contractors, and vendors, Agent Chen explained to Sarah. Plus, we have to consider that someone could have obtained inside information without actually working for Disney. A friend or family member of an employee, someone who had visited the park multiple times and studied the layout, or even someone who had worked there in the past. The media attention was becoming overwhelming. News vans lined the streets outside Disney World, and reporters were aggressively pursuing any angle they could find. Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she never wanted, forced to make public appeals for Tommy's safe return, while trying to maintain hope that was becoming harder to sustain with each passing hour. Please, she said into the cameras. During a press conference on the second day, if you have my son, just bring him home. He's just a little boy. He needs his medicine for his asthma, and he gets scared sleeping in strange places. Please just let him come home. The mention of Tommy's asthma medication added another layer of urgency to the search. Without his inhaler, Tommy could face serious health complications if he had an asthma attack. This detail was broadcast widely, hoping that even if the abductor had no intention of returning Tommy, they might at least ensure he had access to medical care. Behind the scenes, the investigation was following multiple leads that seemed to go nowhere. The costume had been made with materials that could be purchased at dozens of craft stores across the Southeast. The sedative, while controlled, was common enough that tracking its source was proving nearly impossible. Security footage from the park's perimeter showed hundreds of vehicles leaving around the time of Tommy's disappearance, but without knowing what to look for. Investigators were essentially searching for a needle in a haystack. The problem with a place like Disney World, Agent Chen explained to Sarah during one of their daily briefings, is that it's designed to be anonymous. People come from all over the world, pay with cash or credit cards that might not be in their real names, and then disappear back to wherever they came from. If someone wanted to commit a crime and then vanish, this would be an ideal location. On the third day, a potential breakthrough emerged. A family from Georgia came forward with a disturbing story. They had been in the park on July 15th and remembered seeing a man in a chip costume acting strangely near the area where Tommy disappeared. He kept looking around like he was nervous. The father, David Thompson, told investigators. My wife even commented that he seemed different from the other characters. Less playful, more focused, I guess. And when our daughter approached him for a picture, he actually backed away and shook his head. The Thompson family had taken several photos throughout their day at Disney, and investigators hoped that one of them might have captured the fake Chip character. As they reviewed the family's digital camera, Agent Chen felt a surge of excitement. There, in the background of a photo taken at 1:47 p.m., just minutes before Tommy's disappearance, was a figure in a Chip costume. The image was distant and partially obscured, but it was the first visual evidence of the person who had taken Tommy. Can you enhance this? Detective Rodriguez asked the FBI's technical team. We can try, but the resolution is limited. We might be able to get some general physical characteristics, height, build, maybe posture, but facial identification is unlikely given that the person is wearing a full costume. Still, it was progress. For the first time since Tommy's disappearance, investigators had a concrete image of their suspect. The photo was immediately sent to FBI laboratories for enhancement and analysis. As Sarah stared at the grainy image of the person who had stolen her son, she felt a mixture of hope and rage that surprised her with its intensity. This faceless figure in a cartoon costume had destroyed her world, but now they had proof that he existed. We're going to catch him, she whispered, studying every pixel of the enhanced image. I don't care how long it takes or what I have to do. We're going to find Tommy, and we're going to make sure this monster never hurts another child. But as the investigation entered its fourth day with no sign of Tommy, Sarah was beginning to understand that her promise might take much longer to fulfill than anyone had hoped. The person who had taken her son had planned carefully, executed flawlessly, and disappeared without a trace. The real search was just beginning. 3 weeks after Tommy's disappearance, the case had grown cold in the eyes of law enforcement, but for Sarah Mitchell, every day burned with the same desperate urgency as the first. She had taken indefinite leave from her job at the diner, using her meager savings to extend her stay in Orlando. The small motel room she had rented near Disney World had become her makeshift command center. Walls covered with missing person flyers, maps of the park, and a timeline she updated obsessively. Detective Rodriguez visited her every few days, his expression growing more sympathetic but less hopeful with each encounter. The FBI had officially taken over the case, but their resources were stretched thin across multiple missing children cases nationwide. Sarah could see in their eyes what they wouldn't say aloud. After 3 weeks with no ransom demand, no body, and no credible sightings, the chances of finding Tommy alive were diminishing rapidly. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez said, during one of his visits, I know this is incredibly difficult, but you might want to consider returning home to Ohio. We have your contact information, and will notify you immediately if anything develops. Sarah looked at him with the hollow stare of a mother who had barely slept in 21 days. You want me to go home and pretend my son didn't exist? You want me to go back to serving coffee and pie while Tommy is out there somewhere, probably, crying for his mommy? That's not what I'm saying, Rodriguez replied gently. But staying here isn't helping the investigation and it's destroying your health. You've lost 15 pounds, you're not sleeping, and yesterday I found you searching the same area of the park for the 4th time this week." Sarah knew he was right about her physical condition. She caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and barely recognized the gaunt, hollow-eyed woman staring back. But the thought of leaving Orlando felt like abandoning Tommy all over again. What if he escaped and came looking for her? What if someone found a clue and she wasn't here to follow up immediately? It was on a Thursday morning, exactly 22 days after the disappearance, that everything changed. Sarah had developed a routine of walking through the wooded areas surrounding Disney World property. These weren't official park grounds, but rather the buffer zones of natural Florida landscape that separated the magical kingdom from the real world. She had read about other cases where evidence was found in these transitional areas, places where perpetrators might dispose of items while fleeing the scene. The morning was already humid and oppressive, typical for Florida in late July. Sarah carried a backpack with water, energy bars, and a metal detector she had purchased with her last credit card. She wasn't sure what she was looking for exactly, but she knew she would recognize it when she found it. She was about half a mile from the nearest Disney parking lot, in a dense cluster of palmetto bushes and live oak trees, when something caught her eye. At first it looked like a piece of trash, the kind of litter that unfortunately accumulated in these wild spaces. But as she pushed through the undergrowth to get a closer look, her heart stopped. It was fabric, brown and tan fabric with a distinctive texture and pattern. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully extracted the item from where it had been caught on a thorny bush. As she held it up to the dappled sunlight filtering through the tree canopy, there was no doubt about what she was looking at. It was the headpiece of a Chip costume. The same character Tommy had been talking to when he disappeared. The fabric was weathered and stained, clearly having been exposed to the elements for weeks. But the distinctive chipmunk features were unmistakable. The large black nose, the pointed ears, even remnants of the character's signature red shirt collar were still attached. Sarah's first instinct was to scream. Her second was to call Detective Rodriguez immediately. But as she stood there holding this piece of evidence that proved her worst fears, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't the end of her search. It was validation that she had been right to keep looking. She carefully photographed the costume piece from every angle before placing it in a plastic bag she had brought for exactly this purpose. Then she began a systematic search of the surrounding area, moving in careful grid patterns and marking her progress with colored ribbons tied to trees. 20 minutes later, she found more pieces. A brown glove that would have covered the character's hand, fragments of the character's tail, and most chilling of all, a small piece of red fabric that looked like it had been torn rather than cut. When Detective Rodriguez arrived with the crime scene team 40 minutes later, Sarah was sitting on a fallen log, staring at the evidence bags lined up beside her like pieces of a horrific puzzle. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez muttered as he examined the costume pieces. "How did our search teams miss this?" "Because you weren't looking hard enough," Sarah replied without anger, just stating a fact. "You searched the park and the immediate perimeter. You didn't think about where someone would go to get rid of evidence." The crime scene technicians spent the rest of the day combing through the area where Sarah had made her discovery. They found additional fabric fragments, some caught high, in tree branches as if they had been scattered by wind or thrown hastily. More importantly, they found tire tracks in a small clearing about 100 yards away, tracks that led to an old service road that connected to the main highway system. Dr. Patricia Henley, the FBI's behavioral analyst assigned to Tommy's case, arrived that evening to examine the evidence. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of intense focus that came from years of studying the darkest aspects of human behavior. "This is significant," she told Sarah and Detective Rodriguez as they reviewed the findings. "The fact that the costume was discarded so close to the abduction site suggests panic or poor planning. Most predators who target children in public places have exit strategies that don't involve leaving evidence trails." "What does that mean for Tommy?" Sarah asked, afraid to hope but unable to stop herself. Dr. Henley chose her words carefully. "It could mean several things. The perpetrator, might have been an opportunist rather than someone who had been planning this specific crime for a long time. The costume pieces suggest he needed to change his appearance quickly after leaving the park, and the location where these were found indicates he had a vehicle waiting nearby. But is Tommy still alive? Sarah pressed. The fact that we haven't found any other evidence in this area is encouraging, Dr. Henley replied diplomatically. If this person's primary goal was to harm Tommy immediately, we would likely have found more than just costume pieces. That night, Sarah returned to her motel room with the first genuine hope she had felt since Tommy's disappearance. The costume discovery had transformed the case from a mystery with no leads to an active investigation with physical evidence. The FBI was expanding their search parameters, analyzing the fabric for DNA evidence, and cross-referencing the tire tracks with vehicle databases. But more than the official investigation, Sarah felt vindicated in her refusal to give up. Every law enforcement officer who had suggested she go home, every well-meaning friend who had told her to let the professionals handle it, every moment when she had doubted her own instincts, all of that fell away in the face of what she had accomplished through sheer determination. She spread a map of Florida across her motel room bed and began marking locations and expanding circles from where she had found the costume pieces. If the perpetrator had used the service road to escape, where would he have gone? What routes would provide the fastest exit from the Orlando area? Where could someone take a 6-year-old boy and keep him hidden? As Sarah worked late into the night planning her next phase of searching, she didn't know that 200 miles away in a small town called Brooksville, a man named David Chen was reading news reports about the costume discovery with growing anxiety. He didn't know that in a modest house on Maple Street, a 7-year-old boy who had no memory of his life before last summer was asking his daddy why he looked so worried. The costume discovery had done more than provide evidence. It had set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead Sarah to the most shocking revelation of her life. But that revelation was still years away, hidden behind a carefully constructed lie that had convinced everyone involved, including Tommy himself, that his new life was the only life he had ever known. For now, Sarah Mitchell had hope, evidence, and a renewed determination to find her son. The real investigation was finally beginning. The discovery of the costume pieces transformed Tommy's case from a local missing child investigation into a federal priority. Within 48 hours of Sarah's find in the woods, FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb arrived in Orlando with a team of specialists that included forensic analysts, behavioral profilers, and technology experts who would revolutionize the search for Tommy Mitchell. Agent Webb was a tall, methodical man in his early 40s who had spent the last 15 years working child abduction cases. He had seen enough heartbreak to fill several lifetimes, but something about Sarah Mitchell's unwavering determination reminded him why he had chosen this particular specialty within the Bureau. Most parents, understandably, became passive participants in their child's investigation after the initial shock wore off. Sarah had become a force of nature. "Mrs. Mitchell," Webb said during their first official meeting, "I want you to know that your discovery of the costume evidence has given us more to work with than we've had in any similar case in recent memory. But I need you to understand that from this point forward, this investigation needs to follow federal protocols." Sarah studied his face, looking for the same patronizing tone she had grown accustomed to from local law enforcement. Instead, she found genuine respect in something that looked like admiration. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked. "It means we're going to find your son," Webb replied simply. "But it also means you need to let us do our job without interference. No more solo searches in the woods, no more approaching potential witnesses on your own, and definitely no more putting yourself in potentially dangerous situations." The FBI's approach was systematic and comprehensive in ways that amazed Sarah. Within a week, they had established a command center in a rented office space near Disney World, complete with multiple phone lines, computer terminals, and wall-mounted maps that showed every detail of Central Florida geography. The costume pieces yielded crucial evidence. DNA analysis revealed traces of genetic material from 2 different individuals, one presumably Tommy, and another that didn't match any profiles in the national database. More importantly, Forensic examination of the fabric revealed something unexpected. The costume wasn't an official Disney product. "This is a high-quality reproduction," explained Dr. Lisa Park, the FBI's textile analyst, as she showed Sarah and Agent Webb microscopic images of the fabric weave. Someone spent considerable time and money creating a costume that would pass casual inspection, but wasn't manufactured by Disney's official suppliers. "What does that tell us about the perpetrator?" Sarah asked. Agent Webb consulted his notes. "It suggests premeditation and significant resources. Creating a convincing Disney character costume requires specialized knowledge, access to specific materials, and considerable skill. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime." The behavioral profile that emerged from Dr. Henley's analysis painted a disturbing picture of Tommy's abductor. The perpetrator was likely a white male between 25 and 45 years old, with above-average intelligence and possibly some connection to the entertainment or costume industry. He had probably been planning this crime for months, studying Disney's operations and identifying the perfect opportunity to blend in while executing his plan. "The choice of the Chip character is significant," Dr. Henley explained during one of their daily briefings. "Chip and Dale are popular but not as heavily monitored as Mickey Mouse or other primary characters. The costume provides full facial coverage, making identification nearly impossible, and the character's playful nature would naturally attract children." The FBI's technology team had been analyzing security footage from Disney World with sophisticated facial recognition software, but the costume had done its job too well. Even with enhanced imaging techniques, they couldn't identify any distinguishing features of the person who had approached Tommy. However, the tire tracks found near the costume disposal site provided a breakthrough. The tread pattern matched, a specific type of tire manufactured by Michelin and typically used on mid-size SUVs. Cross-referencing this information with vehicle registrations in Florida and surrounding states generated a list of over 3,000 potential suspects. "It's a lot of names," Agent Webb admitted to Sarah, "but it's manageable. We're running background checks on every single person on this list, looking for anyone with a criminal history involving children, anyone who works in entertainment or costume design, and anyone who has connections to the Orlando area." Sarah had been assigned a victim advocate, a kind woman named Jennifer Torres who was supposed to help her navigate the emotional challenges of the investigation. But Sarah found herself more interested in the tactical aspects of the search than in processing her feelings about Tommy's disappearance. "I want to help with the background checks," Sarah told Agent Webb during one of their meetings. "I can research people online, make phone calls, whatever you need." "Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate your eagerness to contribute, but—" "Agent Webb," Sarah interrupted, "with all due respect, I've been living and breathing this case for over a month. I know details about Tommy, about that day, about everything we've discovered that your team is still learning. Use me as a resource." Webb considered this for a moment. It was highly irregular to involve a victim's family member in active investigation work, but Sarah Mitchell had already proven herself to be an exceptional case. Her discovery of the costume evidence had advanced their investigation more than weeks of traditional police work. "Okay," he said finally, "but you work under strict supervision, and you follow our protocols exactly. No freelancing, no pursuing, leads on your own, and absolutely no direct contact with potential suspects." Sarah agreed immediately, and within days she had become an unofficial member of the FBI team. She spent her days in the command center, cross-referencing databases, analyzing timelines, and helping to identify patterns that might have been missed by investigators who didn't know Tommy personally. It was during one of these research sessions, 6 weeks after Tommy's disappearance, that Sarah made a connection that would haunt her for years to come. She was reviewing the list of SUV owners when a name caught her attention. David Chen, age 34, registered owner of a 2008 Honda Pilot with the exact tire type found at the disposal site. Chen lived in Brooksville, Florida, about 90 minutes north of Orlando. He had no criminal record, but his employment history was interesting. He had worked as a freelance costume designer for various theme parks and entertainment companies throughout the Southeast. "Agent Webb," Sarah called across the command center, "I think you need to look at this." Webb examined Chen's file with growing interest. The man fit their behavioral profile almost perfectly: the right age, the right skills, and a vehicle that matched their physical evidence. More intriguingly, Chen had recently applied for a name change for a child in his custody, claiming to be the boy's adoptive father. The child's name is listed as Daniel Chen, age 7, Webb read from the file. But the adoption paperwork is unusual. It's all private adoption, no agency involvement, and the birth parents are listed as deceased with no verifiable records. Sarah's heart began racing. When did he apply for the name change? August 15, 2010, Webb replied, checking the dates. Exactly 1 month after Tommy disappeared. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. A man with costume-making skills, driving the right type of vehicle, living within driving distance of Orlando, and suddenly appearing with a 7-year-old boy just weeks after Tommy's disappearance. "We need to investigate this immediately," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "We will," Webb assured her. "But we have to be careful. If this is our perpetrator, and if Tommy is alive and living with him, we can't do anything that might spook him into running or, worse, harming the child." As the FBI began planning their approach to David Chen, Sarah found herself caught between hope and terror. After 6 weeks of searching, they might have found Tommy. But the boy who had disappeared as her 6-year-old son would now be 7, living with a stranger who had convinced him that his entire previous life had never existed. The investigation was about to enter its most delicate and dangerous phase, and Sarah could only pray that when they finally found Tommy, there would still be enough of her little boy left to bring home. The FBI's surveillance of David Chen began on a crisp September morning, exactly 2 months after Tommy's disappearance. Agent Webb had assembled a specialized team for what he privately considered one of the most sensitive operations of his career. If Chen was indeed Tommy's abductor, any mistake could result in the loss of the only lead they had developed in weeks of intensive investigation. Sarah had begged to be included in the surveillance operation, but Webb had firmly refused. "Mrs. Mitchell, if this is Tommy, your presence could compromise everything. Chen might recognize you from news coverage, or worse, seeing you could traumatize Tommy if he's been conditioned to believe his previous life was somehow dangerous or harmful." Instead, Sarah was confined to the FBI command center, watching live feeds from surveillance cameras and listening to radio communications as agents positioned themselves around Chen's modest 2-story house on Maple Street in Brooksville. The waiting was agony, but it was also the closest she had felt to Tommy since that terrible day at Disney World. The house itself was unremarkable, a typical suburban home with a small front yard, a 2-car garage, and a wooden fence that enclosed the backyard. What made it significant was the life that appeared to be unfolding behind those walls. Through telephoto lenses and directional microphones, the FBI team began documenting the daily routine of David Chen and the boy he called Daniel. Agent Rebecca Martinez, a specialist in child psychology and undercover operations, had positioned herself in a rental house across the street. Her official cover was that of a freelance writer working on a novel, which explained her presence at home during the day and her interest in observing the neighborhood's daily rhythms. Subject Chen appears to maintain a very structured routine with the child, Martinez reported during the first day of surveillance. They leave the house together at 7:45 a.m., presumably for school drop-off. Chen returns alone at approximately 8:30 a.m. and works from a home office until 2:45 p.m. when he leaves again for school pickup. The boy, who might be Tommy, was harder to observe clearly. He appeared to be the right age and general physical description, but surveillance photos taken from a distance were inconclusive. What was clear was that he seemed comfortable with Chen, showing no obvious signs of distress or fear. "The child's behavior appears normal for a 7-year-old, Dr. Henley noted as she reviewed the surveillance footage. "He's animated when talking to Chen. He plays in the backyard and he seems to have established friendships with other children in the neighborhood." If this is an abduction victim, the psychological conditioning has been remarkably effective. This observation was both encouraging and deeply disturbing to Sarah. If the boy was Tommy, it meant he was alive and apparently unharmed. But it also meant that in just 2 months her son had been convinced that his entire previous life, including his mother, had never existed. The breakthrough came on the 4th day of surveillance when Agent Martinez managed to capture clear photographs of the boy playing in the front yard. The images were immediately transmitted to the command center, where Sarah waited with a team of FBI analysts and forensic specialists. Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. The moment the first photograph appeared on the computer screen, she gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. The boy in the picture had grown noticeably in the 2 months since his disappearance, and his hair had been cut shorter, but there was no doubt in Sarah's mind. "That's Tommy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's my baby." The FBI's facial recognition software confirmed what Sarah's maternal instincts had recognized instantly. The probability match was 97.3%, well above the threshold needed for positive identification. After 2 months of searching, they had found Tommy Mitchell, but finding him and rescuing him were 2 entirely different challenges. "We can't just knock on the door and demand the child back," Agent Webb explained to Sarah as they planned their next steps. "Chen has had 2 months to establish a psychological bond with Tommy and to convince him that this is his real life. If we approach this wrong, we could traumatize Tommy or cause Chen to flee with him." Dr. Henley recommended a gradual approach that would allow them to assess Tommy's psychological condition before attempting any kind of rescue operation. "We need to understand how deeply the conditioning goes," she explained. "Has Chen convinced Tommy that his previous life was a dream or fantasy? Does Tommy remember his real name, his real mother, his real life? Or has Chen created an entirely new identity that Tommy has accepted as reality?" The plan they developed was complex and risky. Agent Martinez would gradually establish contact with Chen and Tommy, posing as a friendly neighbor interested in getting to know the community. Meanwhile, other agents would investigate Chen's background more thoroughly, looking for evidence of how he had planned and executed Tommy's abduction. Sarah's role in this phase was perhaps the most difficult of all. She had to wait and trust that the FBI's methodical approach would eventually bring her son home safely. Every day that passed meant another day that Tommy was living a lie. Another day that he was forgetting his real life and accepting David Chen as his father. The psychological evaluation of Chen himself revealed a disturbing profile. Background. Checks showed that he had been in and out of therapy for years, struggling with what his medical records described as attachment disorders and inappropriate relationships with authority figures. He had never been married, had no close family relationships, and seemed to have constructed his entire adult life around the fantasy of having a son. Chen appears to genuinely believe that he's providing Tommy with a better life, Dr. Henley explained to Sarah during one of their briefings. In his mind, he's not a kidnapper, he's a rescuer. This makes him both less dangerous and more dangerous simultaneously. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Less dangerous because he's not likely to harm Tommy physically. He seems to genuinely care for the boy's well-being, but more dangerous because he's convinced himself that what he's doing is morally justified. That makes him unpredictable if he feels threatened." As the surveillance continued into its 2nd week, the FBI team began to understand the full scope of Chen's deception. He had created an elaborate backstory for Tommy's new identity, complete with forged birth certificates, medical records, and school enrollment documents. He had told Tommy that his real parents had died in a car accident when he was very young, and that Chen had adopted him as a baby. Most heartbreaking of all, Tommy seemed to have accepted this story completely. Surveillance recordings captured him talking to other children about his dad, David, and his life in Brooksville, as if it were the only reality he had ever known. There was no indication that he remembered Sarah, their life in Ohio, or even his real name. "How is that possible?" Sarah asked Dr. Henley after listening to one particularly painful recording of Tommy describing his adoption to a neighbor child. "How can a 6-year-old just forget his entire life in 2 months? Children are remarkably adaptable," Dr. Henley explained gently. "At Tommy's age, the line between reality and fantasy is already blurred. If an adult he trusts tells him that his memories are dreams or imagination, and if that adult provides a consistent alternative reality, A child can accept the new version surprisingly quickly. But he'll remember me when he sees me, right? Sarah pressed. He'll remember that I'm his real mother? Dr. Henley's hesitation was answer enough. We don't know, Sarah. It's possible that seeing you could trigger his real memories. But it's also possible that Chen has conditioned him to believe that anyone claiming to be his real family is either lying or delusional. As the surveillance entered its third week, Agent Webb made the decision to move to the next phase of the operation. Agent Martinez would make contact with Chen and Tommy, gradually building a relationship that would allow the FBI to assess Tommy's psychological condition and plan the safest possible rescue operation. But as the agents prepared for this delicate infiltration, none of them knew that David Chen had already noticed the unusual activity in his neighborhood. He had spotted the same cars parked on his street multiple days in a row, had seen the new neighbor across the street who seemed unusually interested in his daily routine, and had begun to suspect that his carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down. That night, as Tommy slept peacefully in the bedroom that Chen had decorated with superhero posters and model airplanes, Chen sat at his computer researching bus routes to Mexico and wondering how quickly he could liquidate his assets and disappear, with the boy he had convinced himself was rightfully his son. The race to save Tommy Mitchell was about to become much more urgent than anyone realized. Agent Rebecca Martinez had spent 15 years perfecting the art of becoming invisible in plain sight. Her specialty was infiltrating communities and families suspected of harboring fugitives or engaging in criminal activity, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to make people trust her within days of meeting her. But as she prepared to make contact with David Chen and the boy who might be Tommy Mitchell, she knew this assignment would test every skill she had acquired. The challenge wasn't just gaining Chen's trust. It was doing so without triggering any suspicion that might cause him to flee with Tommy. Intelligence gathered during the surveillance phase suggested that Chen was already paranoid about discovery, frequently checking locks, varying his daily routines, and showing signs of hypervigilance that indicated he knew his situation was precarious. Martinez's approach was carefully calculated. Rather than introducing herself directly to Chen, she began by establishing herself as a fixture in the neighborhood. She took daily walks past his house, always at different times and for seemingly innocent reasons, checking her mailbox, walking an imaginary dog, jogging for exercise. She made casual conversation with other neighbors, gradually building a reputation as a friendly, harmless newcomer who was simply trying to fit into the community. Sarah watched these preliminary maneuvers from the FBI command center with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Every day that passed meant another day that Tommy was living under Chen's influence, another day that her son was forgetting his real life and accepting his false identity as Daniel Chen. I know this is difficult, Agent Webb told her as they watched Martinez's latest interaction with a neighbor through surveillance cameras. But rushing this process could cost us everything. If Chen's suspects were on to him, he could disappear with Tommy, and we might never find them again. The breakthrough came during Martinez's second week in the neighborhood, when she encountered Chen and Tommy at the local grocery store. It was a carefully orchestrated coincidence. The FBI had been monitoring Chen's shopping patterns and knew he typically visited the store on Thursday afternoons around 3:30 p.m. Martinez was in the cereal aisle when Chen and Tommy rounded the corner with their shopping cart. She looked up from examining a box of granola and smiled warmly. "Oh, hello," she said, as if recognizing them from the neighborhood. "You're from Maple Street, aren't you? I think I've seen you and your son walking past my house." Chen's reaction was immediate and telling. His body tensed, his eyes darted around the store as if looking for escape routes, and he instinctively moved closer to Tommy. But Tommy himself showed no signs of distress. He looked up at Martinez with the natural curiosity of a 7-year-old meeting a new adult. "Hi," Tommy said brightly. "Are you the lady who moved into the blue house?" "That's right," Martinez replied, crouching down to Tommy's eye level. "I'm Rebecca. What's your name?" "Daniel," Tommy answered without hesitation. "This is my dad, David." Martinez felt her heart break a little as she heard Tommy introduce himself with his false name, but she maintained her friendly demeanor. "It's nice to meet you both. I'm still getting used to the neighborhood. Everyone's been so welcoming." Chen had been studying Martinez carefully during this exchange, and she could see him trying to determine whether this was a genuine chance encounter or something more suspicious. His paranoia was evident, but so was his desire to maintain the appearance of normalcy for Tommy's sake. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Chen said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Daniel and I have lived here for about a year now. It's a good area for families." Martinez noted the lie immediately. According to their surveillance, Chen had only moved to the house 2 months ago, right after Tommy's disappearance. But she simply smiled and nodded. "That's wonderful to hear. I'm a writer, so I work from home most of the time. I was worried about finding a quiet place to work, but it seems perfect." Over the next few minutes, Martinez managed to extract crucial information while maintaining the facade of casual neighborly conversation. She learned that Tommy was enrolled in 2nd grade at Brooksville Elementary under the name Daniel Chen, that he was apparently doing well in school, and that Chen had told the school administrators that they had recently moved from up north, following the death of Tommy's mother. Most importantly, she observed the dynamic between Chen and Tommy. The boy seemed genuinely comfortable with Chen, calling him Dad, naturally, and showing no signs of fear or coercion. But Martinez also noticed subtle signs that suggested Tommy's conditioning might not be as complete as Chen believed. When Chen mentioned Tommy's late mother, Martinez saw a brief flicker of confusion cross the boy's face, as if he were trying to remember something that remained just out of reach. When another shopper's child ran past calling for his mommy, Tommy turned to look with an expression that seemed almost wistful. "Well, it was lovely meeting you both," Martinez said as their conversation wound down. "I hope I'll see you around the neighborhood." "I'm sure you will," Chen replied, but Martinez could hear the underlying tension in his voice. He was already planning to avoid her in the future. That evening, Martinez reported her findings to the FBI team. "The boy definitely appears to be Tommy Mitchell," she confirmed. "Physical characteristics match, age is right, and there are subtle behavioral indicators that suggest suppressed memories. But Chen has done a remarkable job of psychological conditioning. Tommy genuinely seems to believe that Chen is his father, and that his previous life never existed." Dr. Henley reviewed Martinez's observations with growing concern. The fact that Tommy showed confusion when Chen mentioned his late mother is significant. It suggests that his real memories haven't been completely erased, just suppressed. But the longer he remains in Chen's custody, the more difficult it will be to recover those memories intact. Sarah listened to this analysis with a mixture of hope and desperation. "How long do we have?" she asked. "How long before Tommy forgets me completely?" "There's no definitive timeline," Dr. Henley admitted. "Every child responds differently to this kind of psychological manipulation. But generally speaking, the longer the false reality persists, the more deeply embedded it becomes. We're already at a critical juncture. Agent Webb made the decision to accelerate their timeline. Martinez, I want you to establish regular contact with Chen and Tommy. Find reasons to interact with them frequently but naturally. We need to assess Tommy's psychological state more thoroughly, and we need to do it quickly." Over the following week, Martinez became a fixture in Chen and Tommy's lives. She encountered them at the park, struck up conversations during their evening walks, and even invited them over for coffee when she saw Chen working in his front yard. Each interaction provided valuable intelligence about Tommy's condition and Chen's state of mind. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and deeply troubling. Tommy was physically healthy and seemed happy, but his memories of his previous life appeared to be almost completely suppressed. He spoke about his life with Chen as if it were the only reality he had ever known, and he showed no recognition when Martinez carefully mentioned details about Ohio or Disney World. Chen, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly suspicious of Martinez's presence in their lives. During their coffee meeting, he asked pointed questions about her background, her work, and her reasons for moving to Brooksville. Martinez deflected these inquiries skillfully. but she could see that Chen's paranoia was growing. "He's starting to suspect something," Martinez reported to Agent Webb. "We need to make our move soon or he's going to run." The decision was made to attempt contact with Tommy while he was at school, away from Chen's direct influence. If they could speak with Tommy in a controlled environment, they might be able to assess whether his real memories could be recovered without traumatizing him further. But as the FBI prepared for this delicate operation, they didn't know that Chen had already made his own decision. That night, as Tommy slept, Chen was packing their belongings and preparing to disappear once again. He had identified Martinez as a threat, and he wasn't going to wait around to find out what kind of threat she represented. The race to save Tommy Mitchell was about to become a desperate chase across state lines, with a little boy's entire future hanging in the balance. At 3:47 a.m. on a cold October morning, FBI surveillance cameras captured David Chen loading suitcases into his Honda Civic, while Tommy slept in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket and still wearing his pajamas. Agent Martinez, monitoring the live feed from her position across the street, immediately radioed the command center. "Subject is mobile with the child," she reported, her voice tight with urgency. "Repeat, Chen is fleeing with Tommy." Agent Webb's response was immediate. "All units, this is not a drill. Subject is attempting to flee with the victim. Maintain visual contact but do not engage until we have backup in position. We cannot risk the child's safety." Sarah, who had been sleeping fitfully in a chair at the command center, jolted awake at the sound of urgent radio chatter when she saw the surveillance footage of Chen's car pulling out of the driveway with Tommy inside. Her worst fears crystallized into terrifying reality. "They're running," she whispered, then louder. "They're running with my son." "Mrs. Mitchell, please stay calm," Agent Webb said firmly. "We have units positioned throughout the area. We're not going to lose them." But even as he spoke those reassuring words, Webb knew the situation had become exponentially more dangerous. A fleeing suspect with a child hostage was every law enforcement officer's nightmare scenario. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and Tommy could be lost forever. Chen had planned his escape route carefully. Instead of heading for the interstate highways where roadblocks could be established quickly, he took a winding path through rural back roads, changing direction frequently and using his intimate knowledge of the local area to stay ahead of pursuit. The FBI tracking team struggled to maintain visual contact as Chen's taillights disappeared around curves and over hills in the pre-dawn darkness. "He's heading southeast toward the state line," reported Agent Collins from the lead pursuit vehicle. "But he's not taking the direct route. This guy knows what he's doing." Inside Chen's car, Tommy was slowly waking up, confused and disoriented by the unfamiliar motion and the darkness outside the windows. "Dad?" he mumbled sleepily. "Where are we going?" Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he glanced at the boy he had convinced himself was his son. "We're taking a little trip, Daniel," he said, using the false name he had given Tommy. "Remember how I told you that sometimes bad people try to take children away from their families? Well, some of those bad people have been asking questions about us." Tommy sat up straighter, suddenly more alert. "Bad people? What kind of bad people?" "The kind who tell lies," Chen replied, his voice taking on the manipulative tone he had perfected over the past 2 months. "They might try to tell you that I'm not really your dad, or that you have a different family somewhere else, but you know that's not true, don't you, Daniel?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "You're my dad. You've always been my dad." "That's right," Chen said, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction at how completely he had rewritten the boy's reality. "And I'm going to make sure no one ever tries to confuse you about that again." The FBI pursuit team faced an agonizing dilemma. They had the resources to stop Chen's vehicle, but doing so while Tommy was inside posed unacceptable risks. A high-speed chase could result in a crash that would kill or injure the boy they were trying to save. A forced stop could cause Chen to panic and harm Tommy. Their only option was to follow at a distance and hope for an opportunity to intervene safely. "We need to think like Chen," Dr. Henley advised from the command center. "Where would he go? What's his endgame?" Agent Webb studied the map showing Chen's erratic route. "He's not just running randomly. He's got a destination in mind. Martinez. What did you learn about his background during your surveillance? Martinez consulted her notes. He mentioned having family in Mexico during one of our conversations. Said his grandmother lived in Guadalajara before she died. It could have been a lie, but it could also be his escape plan, Webb finished. If he can get across the Mexican border with Tommy, extradition becomes a nightmare. The chase continued through the early morning hours, with Chen maintaining his unpredictable route through rural Georgia. He stopped twice for gas, each time keeping Tommy close and paying with cash that he had apparently prepared in advance. The FBI teams watched helplessly from a distance, unable to intervene without risking Tommy's safety. During the second gas stop at a truck stop near the Florida border, Chen made a critical mistake. While paying for gas and snacks, he left Tommy alone in the car for less than 2 minutes. It was a brief window, but it was enough for Agent Martinez to approach the vehicle. "Tommy," she said softly through the partially open window. "Tommy Mitchell?" The boy looked up at her with confusion. "My name is Daniel," he said automatically. "Daniel Chen." "I know that's what you've been told," Martinez said gently. "But your real name is Tommy. Your real mom is Sarah, and she's been looking for you for months. She loves you very much." For a moment, Tommy's carefully constructed facade seemed to crack. His eyes widened and Martinez could see something stirring in the depths of his memory. "Sarah," he whispered. But before Martinez could say anything more, Chen returned from the store. His face went white when he saw her talking to Tommy, and his hand moved instinctively toward the knife he carried in his jacket pocket. "Get away from my son," he said quietly, but with unmistakable menace. Martinez stepped back, her hand moving toward her concealed weapon. "Mr. Chen, you don't have to do this. Tommy needs to go home to his real family." "His real family is with me," Chen replied, getting into the car. "Daniel, don't listen to this woman. She's one of the bad people I told you about." Tommy looked back and forth between Martinez and Chen, confusion and fear evident on his young face. "Dad, why is she saying those things?" "Because she wants to hurt our family," Chen said, starting the engine. "But I won't let that happen." As Chen's car pulled away from the gas station, Tommy pressed his face against the rear window, staring at Martinez with an expression that broke her heart. For just a moment she had seen recognition in his eyes, a flicker of memory that suggested Tommy Mitchell was still there, buried beneath the layers of psychological conditioning that Chen had imposed. "Command, this is Martinez," she radioed, as she ran back to her vehicle. "I made contact with the victim. There are signs that his real memories are still accessible, but Chen's conditioning is strong. The subject is becoming increasingly desperate and potentially dangerous." "Copy that," Webb replied. "All units, be advised that the suspect may be armed and is showing signs of escalating desperation. Maintain pursuit but do not engage unless the child's life is in immediate danger." As the chase continued into Florida, Chen's driving became more erratic. He was running on adrenaline and paranoia, making increasingly risky maneuvers to evade the FBI teams that he knew were following him. In the passenger seat, Tommy sat quietly, trying to process the confusing encounter with the woman who had called him by a different name. "Dad," Tommy said finally. "Who is Sarah?" Chen's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "No one, Daniel. Just a confused woman who thinks she knows you. There are people like that sometimes. People who lose their own children and then try to convince other children that they belong to them instead. But she seemed to know me," Tommy persisted. She knew the name Tommy. "That's because she's been watching us," Chen said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "She's been studying you, learning about you, so she could try to trick you. But you're too smart for that, aren't you, Daniel?" Tommy nodded, but uncertainty lingered in his eyes. The brief encounter with Martinez had awakened something in his memory, fragments of images and feelings that didn't fit with the story Chen had told him about his life. A woman's voice singing lullabies, the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking, a feeling of safety and love that seemed to come from somewhere else, someone else. As they crossed into Florida, Chen made another crucial decision. He couldn't continue this chase indefinitely, and he couldn't risk another encounter like the one at the gas station. He needed to find a place where he could regroup, where he could reinforce Tommy's conditioning and plan their next move. He remembered a cabin his uncle had owned in the Everglades, a remote location that had been abandoned for years. If he could reach it, he would have time to convince Tommy that the people chasing them were dangerous, that their only safety lay in staying together and trusting no one else. But as Chen turned onto the rural highway that would take them deeper into the swamplands, he didn't know that the FBI had anticipated this move. Agent Webb had been studying Chen's family history and had identified several properties that might serve as hiding places. The abandoned cabin was at the top of their list. The final confrontation was approaching, and Tommy Mitchell's fate would be decided in the dangerous wilderness of the Florida Everglades, where one wrong move could mean the difference between rescue and tragedy. The abandoned cabin sat on stilts above the dark water of the Everglades, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that disappeared into sawgrass and cypress trees. Chen had driven for 3 hours through increasingly remote terrain to reach this place, his uncle's old fishing retreat that had been empty for nearly a decade. As his Honda Civic finally came to a stop beside the weathered wooden structure, he felt a mixture of relief and desperation. "Where are we, Dad?" Tommy asked, peering out at the unfamiliar landscape. The boy had been unusually quiet during the drive, and Chen could see that their encounter with the FBI agent at the gas station had planted seeds of doubt that were beginning to grow. "This is a special place," Chen said, forcing his voice to remain calm and reassuring. "My uncle used to bring me here when I was your age. We're going to stay here for a while, just until the bad people stop looking for us." Tommy climbed out of the car and looked around at the isolated cabin surrounded by water and wilderness. "It's scary," he said quietly. "There's nothing to be scared of," Chen replied, though his own fear was mounting with each passing hour. "We're safe here. No one can find us here." But even as he spoke those words, Chen knew they weren't true. The FBI had resources and technology that he couldn't hope to evade indefinitely. His only advantage was time to reinforce Tommy's conditioning, time to convince the boy that the people pursuing them meant him harm, time to plan their next move. Inside the cabin, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The furniture was covered with old sheets, and the air smelled of mildew and abandonment. Chen quickly set about making the place habitable, sweeping away cobwebs and opening windows to let in fresh air. Tommy sat on an old couch watching Chen work with growing unease. The encounter with the woman at the gas station had awakened memories that he couldn't quite grasp, fragments of a different life that seemed to exist just beyond his conscious recall. "Dad," Tommy said hesitantly, "the lady at the gas station, she said someone named Sarah was looking for me." Chen stopped sweeping and turned to face the boy. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when Tommy's carefully constructed false reality began to crack. "Daniel, I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said, sitting down beside the boy. "That woman was lying to you. There is no Sarah. There never was. But she seemed so sure," Tommy persisted. "And when she said the name Tommy, it felt familiar." Chen's heart raced as he realized how close he was to losing control of the situation. "Sometimes our minds play tricks on us," he said, reaching for the psychological manipulation techniques he had perfected over the past months. "Sometimes we think we remember things that never really happened. It's like when you have a very vivid dream, and then you wake up and for a moment you think it was real." Tommy nodded slowly, but Chen could see that the boy wasn't entirely convinced. "Is that what happened to me? Did I have dreams about someone named Sarah?" "That's exactly what happened," Chen said, relief flooding through him. "You used to have nightmares about being lost, about being separated from me. In those dreams you imagined that there was someone else who was supposed to take care of you, but it was just your mind trying to process your fear of being alone. It was a masterful piece of psychological manipulation, taking Tommy's emerging, real memories and reframing them as nightmares and fantasies. But Chen could see that the boy was struggling to accept this explanation, that some part of him recognized the truth, even if he couldn't articulate it. Meanwhile, 20 miles away, the FBI had established a command post at a ranger station on the edge of the Everglades. Agent Webb studied aerial photographs of the area, identifying potential hiding places where Chen might have taken Tommy. The abandoned cabin was their primary target, but the remote location made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. "We can't." "Just storm in there," Dr. Henley warned. "If Chen feels cornered, he might harm Tommy rather than let him be taken away. We need to approach this carefully." Sarah had insisted on being brought to the command post, despite Agent Webb's reservations. She sat in a folding chair, staring at the maps and photographs, trying to will herself closer to her son. "How long has it been?" she asked for the 100th time. 14 hours since they fled the house," Webb replied. "But we're closing in. We have aircraft searching the area, and we've identified several possible locations." "What if we're too late?" Sarah whispered. "What if he's already convinced, Tommy, that I'm the enemy?" Dr. Henley placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Children are remarkably resilient, Sarah. Tommy's real memories are still there, even if they've been suppressed. When he sees you, when he hears your voice, those memories will come back." But privately, Dr. Henley was less optimistic. The longer Tommy remained under Chen's influence, especially in a high-stress situation like their current flight, the more deeply his false identity would become embedded. They were running out of time. At the cabin, Chen was working frantically to reinforce Tommy's conditioning. He told the boy elaborate stories about their life together, creating false memories to replace the real ones that were beginning to surface. He described birthday parties that had never happened, vacations they had never taken, moments of father-son bonding that existed only in his imagination. "Remember when we went fishing last summer?" Chen said, pointing out at the dark water surrounding the cabin. "You caught your first base right out there. You were so excited that you almost fell out of the boat." Tommy tried to remember this event, but the memory felt hollow and artificial. "I don't really remember that," he said quietly. "Of course you do," Chen insisted. "You were wearing your blue baseball cap and you insisted on taking a picture with the fish before we threw it back. I still have that picture in my wallet." Chen actually did have a photograph in his wallet, one he had taken of Tommy during their first week together, when the boy was still confused and traumatized from his abduction. But he had convinced himself that this was a genuine memory of a fishing trip, just as he had convinced himself that everything he had done was justified. As the afternoon wore on, Tommy became increasingly agitated. The isolated cabin, the strange surroundings, and Chen's increasingly desperate attempts at manipulation were all taking their toll on the boy's fragile psychological state. He began to have flashes of genuine memory, images of a woman with kind eyes, the smell of his real mother's perfume, the feeling of being truly safe and loved. "I want to go home," Tommy said suddenly. "We are home," Chen replied quickly. "Wherever we are together, that's our home." "No," Tommy said, his voice growing stronger. "I want to go to my real home. I want to see Sarah." Chen's face went pale. "Daniel, you're confusing your dreams with reality again. There is no Sarah. There is no other home. There's only us." But Tommy was beginning to remember, and with those memories came a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. "You're lying to me," he said, backing away from Chen. "That lady at the gas station was telling the truth. My name is Tommy, and Sarah is my mom." Chen's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. For months, he had convinced himself that he was saving Tommy, that he was providing the boy with a better life than he could have had with his real mother. But now, faced with Tommy's emerging memories and growing resistance, Chen was forced to confront the reality of what he had done. "You don't understand," Chen said desperately. "I love you. I've taken care of you. I've given you everything you need." "You stole me," Tommy said, the words coming from some deep well of recovered memory. "You took me away from my mom." Outside, the cabin, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo across the swampland. The FBI had found them, and the final confrontation was about to begin. Chen looked out the window and saw the aircraft circling overhead, and he knew that his time was up. But he also knew that he couldn't let them take Tommy away. In his twisted mind, the boy belonged to him now, and he would rather see them both die than be separated. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I need you to trust me one more time." The FBI helicopter circled the isolated cabin like a mechanical vulture, its rotors churning the dark water of the Everglades into foam. From her position in the aircraft, Agent Martinez could see Chen moving frantically inside the cabin, and she could make out Tommy's small figure pressed against one of the windows. "Command, this is Air Unit 1, she radioed. "I have visual confirmation of both the suspect and the victim. The child appears to be unharmed but distressed." On the ground, Agent Webb coordinated the response from a makeshift command post established on a small island of dry land half a mile from the cabin. Swamp boats carrying FBI tactical teams were moving into position, but the treacherous terrain and Chen's increasingly desperate state made any direct assault extremely risky. "We need to establish communication with the suspect," Webb decided. "Dr. Henley, I want you to try talking to him. See if you can convince him to surrender peacefully." Sarah stood beside the command post, her heart breaking as she watched the helicopter footage on a portable monitor. After months of searching, her son was so close she could almost reach out and touch him, but he might as well have been on another planet. "Let me talk to him," she pleaded. "Let me talk to Tommy." "Absolutely not," Webb replied firmly. "If Chen hears your voice, it could push him over the edge. We can't risk it." Inside the cabin, Chen was barricading the doors and windows with furniture, his movements becoming more frantic with each passing minute. Tommy watched in growing terror as the man he had been conditioned to call Dad transformed before his eyes into someone he no longer recognized. "What are you doing?" Tommy asked, his voice small and frightened. "I'm protecting us," Chen replied, dragging a heavy dresser in front of the main door. "Those people outside want to separate us, Daniel. They want to take you away from me and put you with strangers who will hurt you." But Tommy's recovered memories were growing stronger by the minute. The stress of their flight and the current crisis had somehow broken through the psychological barriers that Chen had so carefully constructed. "My name isn't Daniel," Tommy said quietly. "My name is Tommy Mitchell, and my mom's name is Sarah." Chen stopped what he was doing and turned to face the boy. For a moment, his mask of paternal concern slipped completely, revealing the desperate, unstable man beneath. "Your mother abandoned you," he said harshly. "She left you alone at Disney World because she didn't want you anymore. I saved you from that." "That's not true," Tommy said, his voice growing stronger as more memories surfaced. "She didn't abandon me. You took me. You made me forget her." The sound of a loudspeaker crackled across the water as Dr. Henley's voice reached the cabin. "Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Elizabeth Henley with the FBI. I'd like to talk to you about Tommy." Chen's face contorted with rage at hearing Tommy's real name spoken aloud. "They're trying to confuse you again, Daniel," he said desperately. "Don't listen to them." "Mr. Chen," Dr. Henley continued, "I know you believe you're protecting Tommy, but he needs to go home to his real family. His mother has been searching for him for months. She loves him very much." "I love him too," Chen shouted toward the window. "I've taken care of him. I've given him everything he needs." Tommy was crying now, overwhelmed by the flood of returning memories and the terrifying realization of what had been done to him. "I remember her," he sobbed. "I remember my mom. She used to sing to me at bedtime. She made me chocolate chip cookies. She never abandoned me." Chen knelt down in front of Tommy, his eyes wild with desperation. "Those are just dreams, Daniel. I'm your real father. I'm the only one who truly loves you." "No," Tommy said firmly, wiping away his tears. "You're not my dad. You stole me and you lied to me, and you made me forget my real mom." The psychological hold that Chen had maintained over Tommy for months was finally breaking completely. The boy's natural resilience and the power of his genuine memories were proving stronger than all of Chen's manipulation and conditioning. Outside, Agent Webb was growing increasingly concerned about Chen's mental state. "He's becoming more unstable by the minute," he observed, watching the thermal imaging feed from the helicopter. We need to end this before he does something desperate. Dr. Henley continued her attempts at negotiation. Mr. Chen, I understand that you care about Tommy, but keeping him against his will isn't love, it's imprisonment. If you truly want what's best for him, you'll let him go home to his mother. His mother doesn't deserve him, Chen screamed back. She lost him. She let him wander away. I'm the one who's kept him safe. You kidnapped him, Dr. Henley replied calmly. You took him from his family and convinced him that his entire previous life was a lie. That's not keeping him safe. That's psychological abuse. Inside the cabin, Tommy had stopped crying and was looking at Chen with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Why did you do this to me? He asked quietly. Why did you take me away from my mom? Chen's face crumpled as he was forced to confront the reality of his actions. Because I needed you, he whispered. Because I was alone, and I wanted to be a father, and when I saw you at Disney World you looked so perfect, so innocent. I convinced myself that I could give you a better life. But it wasn't your choice to make, Tommy said with wisdom beyond his 7 years. I already had a mom who loved me. You didn't save me, you hurt me, and you hurt her too. The truth of Tommy's words hit Chen like a physical blow. For months he had maintained the delusion that he was Tommy's rescuer, that he was providing the boy with love and stability that he couldn't get elsewhere. But now, faced with Tommy's recovered memories and clear understanding of what had happened, Chen could no longer deny the reality of his crimes. Mr. Chen, Dr. Henley's voice came over the loudspeaker again. It's not too late to do the right thing. Tommy wants to go home to his mother. If you let him go, if you surrender peacefully, we can get you the help you need. Chen looked around, the cabin at the barricaded doors and windows, then at Tommy, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. He realized that his fantasy of being a father was over, that his carefully constructed new life was collapsing around him. But he also realized something else, that despite everything he had done, despite all the lies he had told and the psychological manipulation he had employed, he did genuinely care about Tommy's well-being. And if he truly cared about the boy, there was only one choice he could make. Tommy, he said quietly, using the boy's real name for the first time. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Tommy looked at him with surprise. You called me Tommy. That's your real name, Chen said, tears streaming down his face. And Sarah is your real mother, and she's been looking for you every single day, since I took you away from her. Chen walked to the window and looked out at the FBI team surrounding the cabin. I want to see my mom, Tommy said from behind him. I know you do, Chen replied. And you're going to. Chen moved the dresser away from the door and slowly opened it, his hands raised in surrender. Don't shoot, he called out. I'm unarmed. I'm sending the boy out. Tommy ran to the door, then paused and looked back at Chen one last time. I hope you get help, he said simply, then stepped out into the Florida sunshine and began walking toward the FBI agents who were waiting to take him home. As Tommy was led to safety, Chen collapsed to his knees in the doorway of the cabin, finally understanding the full magnitude of what he had done and the irreparable damage he had caused to an innocent child and his desperate mother. The nightmare was finally over, but the long process of healing was just beginning.